Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. This is episode number 19. We're recording it on Wednesday, November 11th, 2020 at 3:18 p.m. Eastern Time. And Joshua was just explaining to us how the entirety of the Protestant movement, the Protestant Reformation, was revolved around this book that Martin Luther wrote called Bondage of the Will, and how this book was explaining to Christians back then that no, you do not have a free will. You are doing God's will. So Joshua, this is so important. Continue to expand on this.
Certainly, George. So where we kind of left off in the last episode is like what George just said, and we wanted to continue into this episode with this understanding that consciousness is evolving, just like we know biology is evolving, right? And biology or evolution just means change over time. So, Martin Luther came into this scientific, now we understand now, and science validates this awareness of reality that we don't have a free will, right? And the sciences of the time, the different people doing the pre-science and the pseudoscience didn't get this, right? He came to it by having this deep spiritual practice and religion and connection to God.
No, well, right? I mean, I gotta back up. In other words, the Greeks, some of the Greeks way before Luther understood this, and the Essenes understood this. And now you're saying that they didn't use science, but I think that there was no science like we know it back today. But I think they used logic. That the Greeks and the Essenes, the Jewish sect, they used, and the Hindus and some Buddhists understood this, but they used logic, which was like the precursor to science. It's important to know.
Sure. I mean, and what you're saying is actually even more super important, because people have to realize this is probably the most fundamental thing to spirituality and to understanding God. And it is, I believe, the majority, the bulk, if not the complete, of evil and spiritual battle, right? These issues. And because it's so strong and such an intense battle, like, we think of the most infamous wars are this long enduring thing. It's a cycle, and we make these breakthroughs, and then the other side wins, and then we make the breakthroughs. And this happens from generation to generation and centuries to centuries. So, the Greeks, the early philosophers, they made a lot of breakthroughs, and a lot of that was lost. A lot of it was demonized intentionally, right? So back to Luther, right? So what I was saying is, in his time, we would hear Luther cite some non-religious sources as, hey, the church is wrong. There we have the free will. Free will is an illusion. There's the bondage of the will, and here's these secular sources to show that, right? Those sources certainly existed before his time, but apparently it wasn't prevalent during his time.
Right. Are you familiar with those specific sources he cited? Because I'm interested to hear what his naturalistic argument against free will was.
I mean, I didn't prepare for this episode. We just got into it for conversation, so I didn't refresh up on the book.
But that's really important. We gotta bring that out.
Well, I mean, my take would be just like Paul. Do you think? I mean, I don't think Paul he's not saying, I looked at science. I talked to the pagans, and I realized, we don't have free will. He said, I devoted my whole life, my whole being, to God, to being holy and spiritual, and still I am sinning left and right. And it's beyond my control. It must be beyond my control. And even if it's not, even if it is my free will, what does that say about all the other people who have full-time jobs and lots of kids and responsibilities to take care of, and they can't meditate and pray all day, and this was the same fallacy St. Augustine explored. St. Augustine convinced people he was holy because he could read silently. He could look at a book, not speak, and then close it and tell you what it read, right?
I'm glad you brought up Augustine, because relative to free will and relative to the true nature of God's, place in our world and our relation to him, we've talked about this before. Augustine, basically confused people. He coined the term free will, as you said, in 380 AD. And basically, his premise for defending free will is that God is all good. And when you start with a mistaken premise, you're going to reach mistaken conclusions. In Isaiah, in the Old Testament, God himself, herself, says, I create light, I create darkness, I create good, I create evil. And as we've explored, Josh, in like episodes 3 through 7, entire series, 5 episodes on the attributes of God, we explained how if God is everything and God created everything, then God must be good and evil. God is everything. God cannot be, everything without God being good and evil. So basically that was, and so like the problem is that, we human beings would rather see ourselves and each other as evil than see that this evil is coming from God. And the problem with that is that that's what causes all the wars. That's what causes all the conflict. That's what causes people to just be constantly at each other. Now, fine. So like we discover that, oh, God isn't all good. God is, responsible. Fine, but we're not strong enough to box with God. I mean, like basically, like if God does something, again, we have to accept it. So, but at least from that perspective, we're maintaining our peace between ourselves, between each other. And then, yes, we have to come to terms with, yes, God is not all good, but God is making the world better and better and better. And that should be enough for everyone.
Yeah, George, and this is such a powerful spiritual practice and principle because, if I realize if George offends me or makes me mad or tries to even hurt me, right? I realize that that's a part of God playing out, right? And so this all of a sudden, this idea of God becomes much more real and much more powerful in all of our daily lives, right? All of our relationships, right? And so even when we're
And if
talking,
that would happen, like you would say to me, not why are you hurting me? Why is God, seeming to make you hurt me? Or why? And then we'd be both on the same side of exploring this rather than, resorting to the blame the free will causes.
yeah, because if I'm not doing that, I'm saying, George, you're evil. You're Satan. You deserve to go to hell. Screw you. And that's just going to make you more defensive. That's creating this free will illusion, creates hate consciousness. It creates, me being critical of yourself, which comes out of a place of me being overly critical of myself and not being loving to myself, right? And this is where hate comes from. This is where all the hate in the world comes from, right? And so instead, we try to troubleshoot it. We look at it, we look at it as a technical, a logical, a rational problem, right? Because, whatever is causing you or causing me to get angry, there's going to be many, many thousands and millions of people in the world that experience that same anger and frustration. And if I can figure it out and we can figure it out together, we can talk about it, we can share it on the show, they might see that. And then all of a sudden
Josh,
their life's changed.
here's where we're stuck. Here's where our world is stuck. When we're trying to figure this out, we're asking ourselves, well, why did he or she do this? Or why did I do this? And that's, if you're starting with the wrong premise, you're going to get the wrong answer. We can only understand it if we ask ourselves, why is God making him or her do this? Or why is God making me do this? Then we can begin to accurately understand, why things like that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, what is God's causal nature? What is the true nature of God in this creation that God created, right? So let's see. Did we cover the bondage of the will? Should we go back to that a little bit
Well,
more?
I'm just when you have time, I mean,
Oh,
we're
no,
going to do
actually,
this.
I missed a really important point that you brought up for us, right? So when we're talking bad about, just like I talked about George, and I'm hoping he'd give me the grace if I get mad at him tomorrow, and cuss him out or whatever, that when I'm talking about St. Augustine in a negative light, or, even if I'm talking about Martin Luther, in this, putting him up on this pedestal, that's not the way we should view each other. We're all just causal mechanisms of God, and in our minds, in our activities, we all say good things, we all say bad things, and it's not really us saying it, it's God saying it, right? And if you look at all inventions, all discoveries, all human progress, the majority of it comes from trying things that don't work out, seeing how it doesn't work out, listening to how it doesn't work out, and then improving upon that, right? So, if it's the Pope, or if it's a guru or a priest or a cleric, we're all just talking monkeys. We are, we're God's talking monkeys, and every talking monkey says some really great things, wonderful things. They're fulfilling, God's purpose on this earth, even when they say the bad things. And we need to love them when they say the bad things or we disagree. And we need to, worship and honor and appreciate them when they say the good things, even if most of the things they say we don't like,
Yeah, and all right, so like, I mean, like I was thinking for while you were talking, I'm thinking maybe we should like end this God series and start something like God's will is the only will. But the problem with that, I'm thinking maybe that like that's like just getting people to accept and understand something that's challenging for them. Whereas like, the benefit of having a show entirely about God is like for people who aren't here yet, for people who still believe in free will, may believe in free will for several more years, however long, we want to show them that, well, you want to know something to be really happy, even though it's much easier if you abandon this free will belief, but to be really happy, to be really loving, and to really enjoy your life, you can do that, not as well as if you abandon belief in free will, but, and this, how do you do this? We want to kind of like explain, just promote this idea that it's about our relationship to God, that's why this series is about if we don't understand the nature, the fundamental attributes of God, it's much more difficult to have a productive, useful, and rational relationship with God. If we see God in a way that God isn't, then that's going to really limit how we interact with God. But yeah, I think it really is better for us to just like continue, this expansive understanding of God. All right, so like, what happened? What happened with the Protestant Reformation? Luther presents this, okay, and apparently, like you're saying, it's like it was the theme of his most important book, I imagine. And then, like, so the Protestant Reformation happens. What happened that people lost sight of that?
Yeah, let me just throw it up on the screen real quick here. Can you see that, George?
Not yet, but it should come up in a minute or so.
So here's the book. Anybody can pick it up. Are you seeing it there?
Yep.
So there's many covers for the book because this is an English abridgment. There's many different, it's been published a lot of times, but everybody's familiar with him hammering the thesis on to start the Protestant Reformation. So encourage anybody to get into it, right? So he took a lot of stances, right? And this is just one of them, but I think just like you were saying, people don't quite get it even yet, because it goes in the cycles, just like with every other social issue of our times, we get it and we make a lot of progress and then we backtrack and, got to keep at it. So I think he realized, he knew, it's pretty clear from his writings and how he talked about this book, that it was the main point. It kind of, all of his other theses were kind of built on top of it. But, if he just came out with this idea, people wouldn't get it, right? So, I mean, I think the main point here, is just to speak to anybody who considers themselves a Christian. Right?
All right, but again, the question is like, and maybe you need to like, look. I haven't looked into that book. I'm not sure I have a copy. I think I downloaded a Kindle copy, but it'd be interesting. And maybe it's not in that book actually. It's like I'm wondering if there's a source that explains. Like Luther was making this point that we don't have a free will foundational to the Protestant Reformation. There have to be authors, and if there isn't, that's extremely curious. But you would think there would be authors that explain, what happened where Luther's central idea all of a sudden is abandoned by Protestantism.
Yeah, the way the book came about is it's a dialogue between him and Ramus. I'm trying to think. Somebody who this theological, another theologian. smart guy that he was kind of debating back and forth about this, you know, it was his reply to, I'm going to not get this pronunciation right, to Desiderius Erasmus, the Libro.
Erasmus, yeah.
Erasmus, yeah. You know, that's kind of, you know, it came out of a letter. It was essentially an epistle, just like most of the books of the, you know, the New Testament are epistles. It was more of an epistle based on his own convictions out of his relationship with God, and comparing that to, you know, the religion dogma of the day, and how the religion kind of demonized the masses and humanity, right? And that's crucial. That's fundamental to understand, because very quickly you'll realize what he's primarily talking about, right? You know, is that we have a bondage of a will, meaning our will is determined. So, you know, they had this idea of God and religion and heaven and hell, right? That, and salvation, it's soteriology is the term, right? So he's not so much talking about free will in everyday life, you know, all day, every day for 90, however long our life is, right? He's talking about God must know who is going to be saved and who's not, because God is all powerful, right? And so he's starting to question this view of God that the church holds, and this idea, this image that the church is projecting of God as this condemning, you know, wrathful, vengeful, you know, deity in the clouds that's just watching everything you do and just waiting to condemn you, right? And so he's challenging both these concepts together, right? And so you have to understand that in that time, this is hard for most people to get nowadays, but you have to understand, right? When you look at all of our life, you know, 80, 90 years on this planet, all day, every day, around the clock, right? We don't have this free will, but the church was so overbearing that they made people believe this, you know, out of fear and, you know, being scared, that this salvation issue was just so much more important than your life here. Your life here is worthless. You're worthless. Your life doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're poor, starving, suffering, diseased. That doesn't matter. If you don't accept God, if you don't believe what we're saying and accept our God and give us money for our God, you know, you're going to burn in hell for eternity, right? And so you can kind of get how that logic of, oh, wait a minute, what about all day, every day when I'm interacting with my family and when I'm trying to, you know, do my job and I'm messing up, you know, or I commit a crime and I get locked away forever. What
Yeah, no,
about that
I
for
think
free will?
I get it now. I think, in other words, like, along with what you're saying, you know, the church basically using this to, you know, to get people to pay, you know, for absolution and all that, or just like to have them in fear and all. I think he got something wrong. He may have, and you know, correct me on this if I'm wrong. Basically, I think Luther was telling people, well, you want to know something? Whether you end up in heaven or hell is in God's hands, and it's not up to you at all. And I think he also said that, like, so it doesn't matter what you do or don't do. And that might have been the point where he got that wrong. And then people believe that and say, well, wait a minute, like that is a horrible belief that you know, you know, if I'm going to hell, I'm going to hell and there's nothing I can do about it. So I think what he should have said with the accurate kind of message is that, yes, you will go to, I mean, again, this is within the context of his belief in heaven and hell, because I don't buy into that. But, you know, if you're going to go to heaven or hell, that is what he should have said, is that it is up to God. It's not up to you, but you don't know what God has decided. So basically, it stands to reason. It's just like if you take a test, right? You know, you don't know if you're going to like do really well on the test or not, but you study, because you know the more you study, the better you do on the test. And so, like, to get into heaven, you know, basically you don't know if you're going to get it or not, because like it is fated. God knows, but you don't know. But you know, I think what people rebelled against is this idea of powerlessness, where what he should have said was, yes, you don't know, only God knows whether you're going to hell or not, or heaven, but you know, the way to heaven is for you to do this and this and this. And that may not necessarily be, you know, let's say completely in line with what you were saying before about what, the church just basically like mandating these kinds of behaviors. But how did that sound? How did I,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Christian denominations are kind of split on this other concept that's like what you're saying, I think, and that's in regards to are we supposed to be trying to create heaven on earth? And many of them believe that is our role, that is the spiritual journey, is to create heaven on earth, right? And I think that's what you're saying Luther should have emphasized more. And I think again, as we unveil this evolution of consciousness perspective as that being kind of revolutionary to all of our thinking, we'll realize that Luther did his job at the time. And I think maybe you and I are playing the role, and many others are, of the modern day Luther to bring the next version, the next update of this mind software, right? Because it has to be incremental, So, I'm pulling up the Wikipedia article here on.
And I just want to briefly, I mean, it doesn't have to be incremental. It could we could have like a global epiphany. Tomorrow, everybody wakes up, oh, we get it. Nobody has a free will.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing potential of religion and of this relationship with God, and why I actually agreed to do this show with you, despite all my, self-doubt and hesitation, is because these massive transformations have so much more potential than these little incremental baby, pleas that we make, but you got to also realize why those don't happen so well, and why politics, and even religion fails at those, is because we have to maintain this kind of uniform, culture. Society is this uniformity, and we have to kind of be able to speak each other's language and be comfortable around each other. If one part of society is making major advances, the part that's left behind can't even get it, right? And so I think that's kind of the smart strategy Luther did. I don't think he really knew. I think God was, orchestrating it to this as big a jump as he could make, right? And so on Wikipedia here, the first thing it just says is, the Latin title of the book was, again, I can't pronounce Latin, but De Servo Arbitrero.
De Libero Arbitrero. I can't either.
Yeah, you got it. You got it better than me. So it literally translates as on unfree will. So it's a book on the unfree will. Another translation is concerning bound choice, that our choices are bound, they're predetermined, right? And so again,
arbitrero is kind of like arbitrary.
Yeah, exactly. And servo, I think this might be a typo on Wikipedia. Actually, I think it is libero, like you described there.
Libero, I think that means free, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
so in the article, it's important to have this understanding, because it is explaining how this is the book is mostly about salvation, and that, if we're making people feel bad because they didn't join or they didn't accept God, that's probably going to make them just rebel against God more. It's probably saying you're a lower class person, you just don't get it, you're too stupid, right? But that was the main issue. That was their consciousness. And you have to realize, right, the term consciousness, all right, you got to get this. The term consciousness was essentially created by the church, right? But it wasn't like we think of today. Being conscious, right, just means, do you know the difference between right and wrong? It didn't account for all the other logical and rational aspects, because we hadn't come into this age of, even agriculture so much, but the Industrial Revolution, right? We wouldn't consider somebody, making a logical or a scientific or mathematics mistake as evil and sinful. We just say that's not logical, that's not rational. Look at
this is a bit tangential. I get you're saying that basically the way they used consciousness, the way they introduced it, was just relative to right and wrong, and we understand consciousness much more expansive than that. But let's pull it back to God. And so, so what, again, we need to reiterate this over and over so people get it. So what is the importance and the advantage of attributing everything that happens to God rather than attributing it to ourselves and each other?
Yeah, so we've got these two major breakthroughs, right? Free will is an illusion, and what is consciousness, right? And you have to realize that the church and Luther came into this like technical, logical, very rational, clear understanding of that through worshiping God, through a relationship with God, when the scientific community of the day didn't, right? And we're living through that again, where science doesn't quite articulate. They're in denial about this free will issue largely. The science proves it if you look at it, right? And so as our spiritual calling in our relationship to God, and God, the creator of everything and all causality and ever present, right? We can actually be better scientists than the science dogma, the scientific church of the day, right? And empower ourselves to live more holy, better lives by embracing this concept. And
Josh, in your life, you've understood that free will is an illusion for years now. So how has it helped you personally navigate this world?
I mean, everything church talks about, it just amplifies it 100, in religion about God, it amplifies it 100 times, right? I mean, you can try to talk about grace and God loves you and God has grace for you all you want. But if you leave out this aspect that God is all causality and that we are all God expressing, God's will instead of our own will, it deserves to go to hell because I'm an evil person or a sinner or flawed, right? That's 1,000 times more powerful message of grace and forgiveness and love and compassion for the self and for each other, right? And when you do that, the mind calms down, nervous system calms down, reality makes sense, and you can be at peace. And then you can calmly, look at all the options, the possibilities, understand the true causality, and look for solutions instead of just playing this blame game, this blame shame game that, this old view of God caused us to play. Again, this illusion, this delusion of free will, and it being preached from the pulpit, and even in academia and science and even psychology, right? It's creating a hate consciousness on this planet, right? It's creating this overly self-critical form of consciousness that we all are, diseased and tormented by, right? When there's real solutions to our problems, our struggles, our suffering, but we kind of, repress that part. We feel bad about it. We're scared to talk about it, and they never get better. And the statistics prove this, right? 90% of small businesses fail. 90% of people who.
Josh, we got about 30 seconds left.
So,
this is really important. I mean, do you want to continue? Do you want to just start another episode, just continuing this train of thought, or?
Yeah, I'm going. I'm game.
Excellent. All right. So again, we've got 17 seconds. Again, we're exploring, why it's so important to understand that, no, we don't have a free will. God's will, God is the creator. God is everything. What God says goes. And to the extent we understand this, we create a much better world for everyone. Thanks for watching. Okay, Josh, I'll see you in a moment.